Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. It is a Stashing with Stephanie day where we have a brand new fat quarter friendly pattern that uses our latest collection, More Pie by Dana Willard. You can see it behind me. And that's from FIGO Fabrics. And it's super fun. If you have been thinking about diving into half square triangles or you wanting to get better at them, this is a pattern to do it with. You are going to be a pro by the time we're all done. We're going to go through how I make half square triangles from squares, how I square them up to make sure everything is the exact right size, and how I make sure I have perfect points every single time. So this is going to be a great tutorial for you if that's something that you either have been wanting to try or maybe need a little help with. Before we get into all that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Stashing with Stephanie. It's a subscription club where we send you 10 fat quarters for $29.99 a month plus shipping. And then our members get access to all of our Stashing with Stephanie patterns. It's not every pattern I've ever written, but it's a lot of patterns. It's over a $200 value, and you get that immediately as soon as you sign up. You can get those for free. And then the 20th in the month after you sign up, we'll send you that first fat quarter bundle, and you get a pattern that's been inspired by the design, like this month's is. And then you get first dibs on getting additional fabric. This is really important because we do sell out pretty frequently of our fabric, even though we're getting a lot in. And what you can do with that is we always put together what's called a finishing kit for our members. So it includes the 5 fat quarters they didn't receive from the collection, plus background and binding. So when you add your finishing kit to your 10-piece bundle, it makes a full quilt kit. And you get an exclusive discount on that additional fabric. And that is getting to be a better deal all the time, guys, because prices are going up. Inflation has hit the quilting world too. So you're going to be paying more for your quilting cottons in 2022. And joining our club is a great way to be able to quilt more, but also keep your fabric budget under control. So that is a really awesome thing to do. You can also get yardage if you want to do a different project, but you still want to get the full collection. That is totally optional. You can make that happen for yourself. You can get some extras for backing, and it's all going to be at that exclusive discount and first dibs, so you can make sure you get all of what you need in order to make the project that you have in mind. Now, I always say this, but people totally forget it every single time, is that if you sign up by the end of the month, so it's February right now, then your first bundle will ship around the 20th of March. That's dependent on when we receive it from the fabric companies, but we try to hit around the 20th. And if you sign up at the beginning of the month, like say you see this on the 1st and you sign up of March, your first bundle is not going to ship until around the 20th of April. We do that for a couple reasons. One, it's kind of a mad dash whenever we send out that email to our subscribers, letting them know that, hey, the pattern is out and you can get the fabric. And we want to make sure everybody has the same chance of getting additional fabric, because we do sell out, and that is the best way to do it, is make sure everybody gets it at the same time, so we have to ship everything all at once. It also allows us to make sure that we make the exact amount of bundles that we need to ship out. That way we have the most available for additional fabric for you guys who are members afterwards. But people miss that all the time. So if you sign up on the 1st, I'm sorry, you got a 6 to 7 week wait, and you know, that's why you get those free patterns right away, so you can get that value. But this morning I got an email from somebody who was very unhappy because they just hadn't read. And you know, as long as you read, you know what's up, then you will be perfectly happy, because we always fulfill everything that we say you're going to do. You're going to get your bundles, you're going to get your fabric, but make sure you sign up around the end of the month so you don't have as long of a wait for that first bundle to arrive, and you'll be very happy that you did. Okay, so let's take a peek at this month's collection, then we will get started on the tutorial. So this month's collection is More Pie by Dana Willard. She is a YouTube star in her own right from MadeEveryday.com. This is a really fun one. It's very vintagey vibes to me, and this one specifically gives me quilt vibes as well in terms of all the geometric shapes. If you're a Pinterest fan, then these shapes may remind you of the little shapes that people are cutting out to put on top of their pies. At least that's the vibe I'm getting from this. And of course, you can't have pie without some fruit. We have little cherries on here with some cherry blossoms. Whenever a collection isn't quite large enough to meet the 15 fabrics that we include, we always fill in with some basics. This one is from the Lucky Charms collection by FIGO. It's a great basic. It just fulfills the 2-3 colors, and so you're seeing more of the color to coordinate with these lovely teals. This one looks like a fun splatter. You know, you just got your batter all over the place while you were cooking. This is another one of those Lucky Charms basics. Helps fill in those teals really well. All right, banana cream pie, anybody? We've got some lovely bananas moving into a new colorway here. And this is a print that our team gets to pull the scraps that are too small to sell. And so they were all grabbing little bits of this because when do you ever see a banana on fabric? It's super fun. After working with this fabric for the last week or so to make the quilts, I am definitely thinking that once I'm finished, I'm going to be going into my canned peaches that I canned myself and making some peach pie when we're all done. Here's that fun little block print again that we saw in the teals. This time it is a nice yellow color. Very fun and happy yellow. Here's that splatter again. It's kind of like an orangey yellow. Now we're kind of getting into like a peach tangerine colorway. So here's that splatter again. This one has all the fruits you might make a pie with. We have bananas, peaches, raspberries, strawberries, cherries. Just makes me hungry looking at this fabric. And of course, we cannot have a more pie collection without actual pies with fun little messages and designs on them. So here we can see we've got pies with stars and fun little shapes cut out and fun little sayings. It's just, like I said, this one makes me hungry. Got another Lucky Charms basic that's going to fit in real well with these browns and rusts. And we're going to finish up where we started with that geometric design. I love this color palette. I think it's so pretty. It ties in really well with everything else that's going on, and it looks great when we get it in the quilt. So this first section of the tutorial is going to be all about making your half square triangles. Then we're going to move on to how to get them together where you have perfect points every time. I like to make my half square triangles from squares. I feel like it's a very accurate way of doing things because the bias can be a little stretchy. And the best way to have it not stretch out on you is to sew it together while it's still attached to the other half of the bias. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your background fabric and you're going to draw a line from point to point on the wrong side. And then you're going to be able to layer this right sides together with your other triangle. And I've got that line drawn, and typically when we sew, what we're doing is we're lining up the edge of the fabric with our presser foot. But for this one, we're going to pretend that that line is the edge of the fabric. So when we sew down, we're going to sew all the way down the one side, then we're going to flip it around and we're going to sew all the way down the other side. And I actually chain piece these. I posted a video to TikTok that showed how I was doing it, and it went way faster than it did in real life, but it does speed things up quite a bit because you're able to save on thread and you can just kind of feed one in right after the other, and you can get through them a lot faster this way. And then in a little bit, we're going to cut that apart, and it's a very accurate way of doing things. So when I sew a triangle from square, I'm going to first set my sewing machine up to sew a 1/4 inch seam. So my needle has moved, so that way if I line the edge of that line up with the edge of my presser foot, I'll be exactly a 1/4 inch away from it. But I'd like to give myself a little bit extra wiggle room. That way, if I'm off anywhere, I have enough space to trim down to where everything's going to be the correct size. So on my machine, I can just press a button and that needle moves one needle width closer to the edge of that. It's called a scant 1/4 inch seam, and it is your friend when you're sewing half square triangles. Now, if you want to pin this, you can. What you're going to want to do is pin across the top and across the bottom. It really does not do you any good to pin way out on the sides here because these points are what you need to have together in order to have good half square triangles. I've done thousands of these, so I skip that step because I've got it down from here, but feel free to do that if you like. All right, so with the edge of that presser foot lined up with that line that I drew, I'm just going to be stitching down. And what I do, since I don't pin, is I'll get that first part lined up, and then I'll just make sure that my points are on top of each other where they should be at the bottom. Then when I get down here, I like to keep my finger to the side because that helps maintain that 1/4 inch stitch all the way down. If you end up with a smiley or frowny face when you cut your blocks apart, you could have either stretched it apart when you were working with it on the bias, or you could have not maintained your 1/4 inch stitch all the way to the points. Either one will mean that you do not have the correct seam for your half square triangle. All right, so if you wanted to chain piece, you could just do that right now. What I like to do when I'm all done with that is just pull it out a little bit. No need to even clip those threads. And we're just going to now line up along the other side, and we're just going to stitch down. Now, if you've never sewn triangles this way before, I recommend that you do one first to see how it goes before you do a whole bunch. That way you know if you have to make any adjustments. So at this point, you want to give yourself a little quality check. We can see my seam lines here and here. I'm going to flip it over because you'll be able to see it. Actually, you can see it better on the white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the edge of my ruler up with that first seam, and I should be right at 1/2 inch or ideally a little bit less than, and in between those stitch lines. That's going to give me my 1/4 inch stitch on both sides. We're good to go. We know our unit is going to turn out the right size when we're all done. All right, so now I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up on that line that I drew, and I'm just going to cut straight down it. Now, it's not super important that you're exactly on that line because you might be off a little bit from side to side. What you don't want to have happen though is have a really skinny seam, because that puts stress on it and it can pop open with use, or even just when you put it on the long arm to have it quilted. But at this point, when you open it up, we have not one, but 2 half square triangles for the price of 1. So we're going to press these open and trim them up, and then our work is done. Well, not really. We still have to get the whole quilt top together, but it really goes super fast. 99% of the time, I'm going to press my seams open. I'm going to do that by opening that first with my fingers and putting the tip of the iron straight down that center seam. I like to do this especially on triangles because it helps give me really flat points and really flat joins, which makes it just absolutely fantastic when we go to join this later into a block. All right, I'm gonna do the other one, then we are ready to trim down. So when I write my patterns for half square triangles, I do it by adding 1 inch to the square that we're going to make. Now, technically you only have to add 7/8 of an inch, but I'm in the camp where I would rather cut a little bit off and have it be the right size than have something go wrong a little bit and then not have enough. So here's how you're gonna trim this down. Your most important line to pay attention to is the 45-degree line on your ruler. You want that to be right on the seam, especially when it's at the corners, because that's what's going to make sure that everything is in the right spot. If that's off to start with, say we have it like this and it's coming off to the side, you're never going to be able to get that point where it belongs because it wasn't there to start with. The other thing, I'm trimming these down to 3.5 inches. I want to make sure I've got a little bit of fabric hanging off beyond the outside here and down here, and then of course on the side we're going to trim too. Once I have everything where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and give that a trim. And we can see we're going straight out to the corner. It's exactly what we want. We're going to go ahead and flip that around, and this time I'm going to line everything up so that way I've got my 3.5 exactly on the edges, because we just trimmed that down. And now we're going to slice off this section here. And I've had people ask, why not just use an AccuQuilt? Then you won't have to go through all the trimming, because it does take time. Like, this takes a lot of time when you're doing it for a big quilt. But there's more that goes into having your pieces turn out the correct size than cutting them to the correct size, because I'm a very accurate cutter. Guaranteed these were all the right size when I started. But I got in the hundreds that I made for this quilt different amounts of extra off on every single one, because how accurate your 1/4 inch seam is and how you pressed, and there's just a lot of things that go into what this unit ends up being when it is in half square triangle format than how you cut it in the first part. That's only one component. So use an AccuQuilt if you got it. Of course, that's going to save you some time, but do not skip the trimming step. Don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, I'm fine, it won't be a big deal, because This is a very different size block than this one. And if you're trying to put them together, you're going to have all of your dog ears are going to be getting in the way of having super flat points. You're just going to have more issues. So take the time, do it. I very early on in my quilting career, I did an entire triangle quilt. I didn't trim a single thing down. And once I got to like that assembly stage and I was quilting it especially, I was very much regretting that decision, and I very much understood why it was recommended, because you just get such better results when you spend a little bit extra time to piece it like that or to trim it down like that. All right, so now it is time to sew our block together. And I did a whole bunch of different iterations when I was figuring this out. And ultimately I thought that this was a really fun way to put our half square triangles together, grouping them together by color so they could just like be little squares on point all over the place and be offset. And I thought that would make a fun picnic quilt someday for somebody. So here we go. We've got everything together. Now I'm going to show you how I pin things together to make sure that everything comes together just perfectly in the end. I'm going to start by putting my right sides together. And then what I do is I look at it from the top. It's really easy to see when we press these open where those seam lines are. Ideally, we want them to be right on top of each other. And especially when we have our background on one side and our print on the other, it's really easy to make that happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin in what's going to be the right side of that seam allowance. So in this case, it's at the very top of the block. So what I'm going to do when I start sewing is I'm going to put this under my machine. I stitch a little bit into here, just enough to get it to where my needle is securely anchored and down in the first half of the seam allowance. Only then will I remove the pin and sew the rest of the way. For the bottom, it's basically the same process, just instead of pinning in this top part, we're still pinning in what is going to be we get to next. So when you're sewing, you think you're coming this way, you want to be able to stop with your needle down in that first half of the seam allowance. It holds everything together. That way you can safely remove your pin and keep going. Now, if you still have your sewing machine on that scant 1/4 inch stitch, make sure you move it back to a regular 1/4 inch stitch for this next part. All right, so I still have my pin in here. We're going to leave that for now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it right underneath that presser foot, and I'm going to take my first couple of stitches, about 3 or 4, just so that I am solidly got this first half of that seam allowance underneath that needle and sewed in. Now with that needle down, I'm going to go ahead and remove that pin, and now I'm good to sew the rest of the way, knowing that nothing's going to shift and my points are going to be where I want them to be. Now for this bottom half, the point is way at the bottom. So I can go ahead and sew first. And then when I hit that, see my needle is now down in that first half of that seam allowance. Now is the time to remove that pin. If you remove that pin too early, you're going to have problems. Things aren't going to end up where they're supposed to be. That's one of the reasons why I'm not really a fan of the 1/4 inch feet that have the guide over here, is they get in the way of my pins. I have to pull them out too soon and I'm not able to make it work. I do like them for other applications, just not for accurate piecing. I press these seams open as well because it gives you a really, really fabulous join and a flat point when you're all said and done. So once I'm done pressing from the back, I always press from the front too. And just look at that join. I mean, we've got our points going right to the center. They look like they're joined absolutely fabulously. Sometimes when you press it under, it makes a point that was joined perfectly look like it's off because it kind of folds it over, and where it met perfectly is now hidden under your fabric, which is no good. So this is what I do for all my points. They just lay so super flat, and it actually makes pinning a little bit easier too in our next step. All right, so now it's time to join our block halves, and we've got a couple of points to pay attention to. Obviously we have our center where everything comes together. We need to have it be good. And then also we have our corners here. Now this is going to be pretty similar to when we pin up here to put everything together in terms of where we pin and how. This one is also the same. We're just going to look from the top and get our seams spread on top of each other, and always pin in that right side of the seam allowance because that's the section we're going to come to second when we're sewing. So we're just going to flip these guys right sides together, and I'm just going to go through that same process of lining my fabrics up so that they're right on top of each other, pinning. And then here is a little easier because they are straight up and down. And then over here, we have the same situation where we're just going along those corners, getting the seams right on top of each other. All right, so now we're ready to start sewing. We're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna get a couple stitches in, get that nice and secured with the needle down, then pull this, and then we'll sew all the way until our needle is down in the first half of this seam allowance to pull this, get all the way to the bottom, get our needle secured right in this peach part, and then pull the final pin, and that will keep all our points where we want them. And if you wait until like the very last second to pull out those pins, you will not be sorry, because everything will stay where you intend it to be. All right, ready to pull? Pull again. Now for the end where I can't hold on to anything, I put my finger to the side, and that helps me maintain that 1/4 inch stitch all the way down to the end. All right, now we're able to press this open again, and I'm very careful with this step. I do a lot of lifting and pressing in my iron, so we have a lot of seams going in a lot of directions. I don't want to flip anything going the wrong way. Now this is my secret to a really flat block. One, I got a good old Liesel iron, it gets super hot, gets everything flat. I love my wool pressing mat. We don't sell these because they're just too expensive to ship, so go find it on Amazon. But then I also take, instead of putting water in my Liesel, because every iron I've ever put water into eventually spits and gets gross. And I've had my other one for about 6 years and it is still going strong. It's fabulous. I've killed like 3 other cheapo irons in that time, but that one's fabulous. So no water in it, and so I use a spray mister instead. It turns water or liquid into a light aerosol mist so you don't get those water droplets. And then I'm able to go over it, and between that hot iron, the pressing sheet, the wool pressing mat, this just gets so flat. And look at all these points. I mean, they are just fantastic. This one is a little hard to see because it gets kind of white at the ends there, but everything is just like right on. This one is just a teensy weensy bit off, but you're not going to be able to tell that once it's all together and quilted. So take your time, trim and pin, and wait to remove those pins until the last second, and you too will have points that look absolutely like this. There's a couple more skills we can learn from joining our blocks together. So we're going to continue on just a little bit. And by the way, if you are digging this, you think this is awesome, you want to get better at triangles, we have an entire triangle masterclass that you can take. The videos are free and the pattern is free if you buy a kit as well. Otherwise, you can just purchase the pattern and use your own fabrics. Make sure you check that out. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to show you how to get these points perfectly aligned when you pin them together using the 2-pinning method. So first we're going to flip everything right sides together. Now you can see, especially because we pressed everything open, where this V is, and it's made where the pieces come together. Now we want to be right in the middle of that seam, right at the tip of that V in the background fabric. That's where we want to stick our pin, because we want to sew just to the side of that, like 1 needle width to the side of where that V is, and that will make sure we can see all our points, we don't cut anything off, everything's fabulous. So I've got my pin in there, and then I'm going to pin at the very tip of where these triangles are as well. So I'm going to put this pin in right at the tip of that. And this time it worked out to where my edges aren't exactly even. That's not always the case. And if it's not, if your edges are not perfectly even and one is in further than the other, don't worry about it. No one's going to see the inside of your quilt, and it will quilt out. It will look fabulous. It will be flat. But they will be able to tell if your points were not right from the outside. So always err on getting your points right, and don't worry so much about what's happening on the inside if it's not perfect. All right, so I've got that pin pinched between my thumb and forefinger. And with that pinched straight up and down so that my points are right on top of each other, I take a second pin and I put it in through that right side of that seam allowance. Then I can remove this pin because I know that everything is in line where it should be. So now when I'm sewing, I'm going to stitch all the way down, and I'm going to stop again on the right side of the seam allowance before I pull this pin with my needle down. And I'm aiming to sew just right here. just one needle width to the right of where that V is. And that will make sure that I can see my points, that they are just kissing perfectly when I put everything together, and it'll be fantastic. Now you can also pin at the top and bottom of your block. I didn't for any of these, I just lined them up as I was sewing, but that's up to you. So I'm gonna go ahead and stitch this and press it, and you're gonna be able to get that big, fabulous reveal. One tip, because I ran into this problem. There's a little like lip when you go over this, and sometimes it can flip your seam going back the other way, which will make your block not as flat. So what I like to do is just kind of lift up a little bit, make sure everything is pointing in the direction it should before I keep on sewing. All right, we're sewing just to the right of where that V was. And I can pull my pin out because I sewed right up to it, but not beyond. Got that point lined up, and we'll sew the rest of that block. All right, now we got a lot happening here. There's a lot of seams coming together, but it's gonna be a flatter seam because we pressed those seams open. But I do spend a little bit extra time just letting the iron sit on that. There's no need to like push down and give yourself carpal tunnel, but the heat will do it. But just spend a little extra time to help get that flat. This is also a point where I'll give that seam a spritz and hit it from the right side as well, just to help everything lay super, super flat. And this, my friends, is a very, very good join. We have just the teeniest little bit of space of white that we're gonna see here. Once that's quilted, you're never gonna see that. This is something I totally would leave as is. The points are meeting perfectly. We're not like jogged off on either side, and they're just perfectly in line and really just meeting really well. Let's take a look from the back too, and you can just see how good this is. I mean, this is so flat. If we look from above, we can see too that it is just a really, really flat seam. There's no big hump there that's gonna be problematic when we start to quilt. So this is the way I do it. This is the way I press all my seams. I know that you may have been told that that is a problem, that it will last over time, and I'm here to tell you that I've made hundreds of quilts and like this, and I've never had a problem, but I sure as heck get really fabulous results from the way they look, the way they last, and the way they quilt up. So consider doing this if you have been pressing to one side or the other. Switch pressing open. I bet you're gonna like it. One final thing I'm going to call your attention to before we wrap up this month's tutorial is this month's tutorial has an offset, or pattern has an offset design. So you're going to make sure you're paying attention to your pattern to go along with this. It's called Afternoon Picnic, because you're going to want to leave just a few of your blocks as half. So these are half blocks. You're just going to stop when you get it sewn into that horizontal row, and that's going to be what's going to be at the top and bottom of your odd rows. And what it's going to do is create this really cool design where it's going to kind of be swooping back and forth, and it is really fun, and it's going to allow you to quilt it a lot faster. I've already know what I'm doing with mine, and it's going to be so fun. I'm going to turn it sideways and just be done with that lickety split. It's going to be so fun. So pretty. And then also it adds an element, because it's not just like block, 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 block. You know, it's up and down. And so it adds some movement to it. And it means that you won't have as many of these points to come together, because here we're going to be matching up this point here, which is a nice straight seam. So it's going to make it a lot easier. So that's it. That's Afternoon Picnic. If you've enjoyed this, make sure you check out our Triangle Masterclass series, and you can learn a whole lot more about having absolutely perfect points all the time. And also make sure that you check out Stashing with Stephanie. If you join by the end of February, we're going to be shipping your first bundle to you around the 20th of March. That date is a little fluid because, you know, shipping is still an issue in terms of getting the fabric to us. Once we get it, we move through it pretty quickly, but we have to have it in a reasonable time, and we haven't always. So this was actually a stand-in. This was not originally supposed to be our fabric for this month, but it is a fabulous one, and the one we had intended to be this month, Martha from FIGO, that's going to be next month instead. So it's really pretty. I'm really excited about it, and it makes me just want to go make a pie. I think as soon as I wrap up stashing this month, I'm going to have to make myself a pie, go down. I've got some pie filling for apples that I can, from apples that my daughter and I picked at a local orchard. And then I also have a bunch of peaches that I can. And yes, I can. I'm a crazy lady. I do a lot of the crafty things. I also knit. I'm dabbling in some garment sewing, and I can a lot of stuff, and I cook a lot of stuff when I have time, which isn't always. I've got 2 small kids and a business to run, but I love all the things, and this quilt is making me hungry, so I have to go make something after we're done with this that we can actually eat, in addition to something we can keep warm under and think of happier, warmer days when we can go have a picnic outside. So anyway, check out Stash with Stephanie. Over $200 worth of patterns you can get for free the second you join. You get an exclusive discount on my book, Fat Quarter Workshop and Fat Quarter Patchwork Quilts, both of which are packed with obviously fat quarter patterns. You get an exclusive discount and first dibs on getting additional fabric, and that's of course in addition to your bundle of fabric at $29.99 a month plus shipping. And that deal is getting better and better, guys. Fabric prices are going up. I'm getting the messages all the time from the fabric manufacturers. It's just inflation is everywhere, including in our quilt stores. So grab it, and you can definitely quilt on a budget this year. All right, until next time, happy quilting.